Hi. Well, so far we've really focused on how to construct these basic triads in major keys and the three forms of minor keys. So before you go on, just make sure you're quite happy about putting those together in any key that you might need them. And part of this is also an opportunity to make friends with keys that you might not be so happy working in. I've had lots of people are happy working in C major, G major, F major, maybe A minor, E minor, D minor. The further round the circle of fifths you go, the more people kind of tend to think, ugh. And then by the time you get to the bottom of it and you're in C sharp major or A sharp minor, you've kind of lost the will to live. So it's not a bad idea just to kind of start to explore the keys that are in the lower part of the circle of fifths. So you don't go through your musical life avoiding difficult keys. Okay, well, what we're now going to do is to talk about how we turn these triads into four-part chords. Now, why am I talking about four-part chords? Because we could maybe want to write a piece of music that uses five-part chords or six-part chords or 10-part chords. That is absolutely fine. And some of the principles that we're going to look at now will apply to anything beyond four parts. But a lot of music actually does come out essentially in four parts. So for example, if you're writing for a standard choir, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, well, you've got four parts. If you're writing for a string quartet or a wind quartet or a brass quartet, you've got four parts. Quite often, if you're writing a keyboard accompaniment to something, you've essentially got four parts. Sometimes it might reduce to fewer parts or extend to more parts, but you're kind of working often in a framework of four parts. And the first thing that might occur to you is, well, hang on a minute. If I've got a triad only contains three notes. So if you're going to talk about four-part chords, where's the fourth note coming from? Well, you are allowed to double any of the notes in the triad. Now, there are one or two specifics about that we will come to in due course. We're not going to worry about that for the moment. We're just going to get used to this idea that you might be able to take one note and use it more than once. So let's start with the easiest triad that we might have to deal with, which is chord 1, or the triad for chord 1 in C major. Okay, so there is a C major triad. Okay, now if I want to present that in four parts, let's have a think about how we might want to do that. And for argument's sake, let's have a treble clef and a bass clef and sort of think of it in terms of vocal spacing, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, because you can transfer that to a string quartet or a wind quartet or something fairly easily. So if I've got this basic triad, and at the moment we're going to do this work in root position. Now don't worry too much about that, but when you have a chord in root position, it means that whichever note is at the bottom of the triad is going to be at the bottom of the chord. So let's start with that C at the bottom and put it in the bass part. So if we're in root position, C is going to be at the bottom. Okay, now the first thing you might have noticed about that is, well, wasn't this middle C? And now you've written C an octave beneath that. Absolutely true. It's fine. You can use this in any octave you want to. So I could have middle C as my bass note. I could even go up here or even up there. But I could go down here or down here or down there. Doesn't matter. It's still classified as a root position chord as long as the bottom note of the triad is the lowest sounding note. Okay, well then I've got these other two notes, E and G. And then I'm thinking if I'm in four parts, I'm going to have one of these notes used more than once, aren't I? Okay, now do I have to use these in the order in which they come? I mean, do I have to use C at the bottom and E maybe in the tenor part and G in the alto part and then double something at the top? No, you can put them in any order you like, as long as that C is sitting in the bass, because we're writing what's called a root position chord. So, for argument's sake, let's see if we could do this. We'll take the E out of the middle of the chord and put it in the alto part. Now, the next thing you're going to say to me is, well, hang on a moment. In the original triad, these notes were a third apart, and you were telling us how important it is to be able to count 1, 2, 3, 4, so it's a major third. True, but you can place that major third or the perfect fifth above it in any octave you want to. So as I've got that C in the bass, instead of having an E down here, I've decided to have E an octave higher. Absolutely fine. And we don't have to take these notes in order. So the next thing I'm going to show you is that we could take that G from the top of the chord and we could put it in between the other two notes we've written. So we could put it there. So I've got C at the bottom, I've got E up there, and I've got G down here. So then we've got the three notes of the triad, but we've got them spaced out differently. Now, in terms of writing a triad, we say that this is written in a closed position, just C, E, G on top of each other. And we say that this is written in an open position because we've spaced it out. Okay, now then, if we're going to have so far C in the bass, G in the tenor, E in the alto, well, we need something else in the soprano part. Well, there's nothing to say that we couldn't have C at the top. So in other words, C has come twice here. We've got it at the bottom and we've got it at the top. So what does that sound like? I've got C in the bass, G in the tenor, E in the alto, C at the top. So I started with the original triad, C, E, G, and now I've got a four-part chord. C, G, and then E, C. So you see how we've kind of got from that original chord to that. It would have been perfectly possible to have done the same thing that we started with, but maybe double a G at the top. Okay, so you can see what we've done this time. We've got one C, we've got one E, but this time we've got two Gs. What does that sound like? So the first chord I wrote was this. Now I've written this. So you can hear that note at the top has changed, but it's still sounding the three notes of a chord 1 in C major. So in the first example, I've doubled the root of the chord. In the second example, I've doubled the fifth of the chord. We could have another one where we double the third of the chord. There's a little rule about that, which we'll come back to very soon. But for now, just get used to the idea of, well, here's the triad. Now we're spacing it into a chord. And that clarifies the difference between a triad and a chord. So this is the triad for chord 1 in C major. These are examples of chords for chord 1 in C major. You see how we've taken the notes of the triad, converted them into a chord. Are there other possible things we could have done with that? Well, we could have done something like this. I have C in the bass, I'll have another C in the tenor, have a G in the alto, have E at the top. So you can see I'm not using any notes that don't belong to this triad. So that's where we are. Our starting point at the moment is that if the triad is C, E, G, those are the only notes you can use, otherwise you turn it into something else. And because we're in root position, we're saying that the bottom note of the chord must be at the bottom. We'll come to other possibilities shortly. So let's have a look at what I've done here. So I've got C in the bass, I'm doubling that C in the tenor, I've got G in the alto, that's the fifth, and I've got E, the third, at the top. So now I've got three different spacings of that chord. Here was the first one, the second one, the third one. So you can kind of see, oh yeah, I see lots of possibilities for this. I could do something like this. I could have C in the bass, I could take this tenor part a bit higher, up to an E maybe. And then I could have C doubling in the alto part this time and put my G in the soprano part. So again, it's all C, E, G. I've doubled the C and I've got C in the bass, E in the tenor, C and G. So there's the chord. Different kind of spacing. So we've now got 4 possibilities. This was the first one, and the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one. Okay, this is not exhaustive. There are other possibilities, but I'm hoping you can see, actually, this isn't too scary a process. So we're talking about chords in root position, and that means, just to remind you, that whatever note is at the bottom of the triad, that must be at the bottom of the chord. Although I've written all those C's in 1 octave, let's just give you another example where perhaps we put the bass C up here and we put a tenor E there, and maybe we have a G in the alto and a C there. So there's another possibility. But this time the bass is an octave higher than it was. And I've got C at the bottom, C at the top, E in the tenor, G in the alto. So you can see some of these chords are more widely spaced. Some of them are more packed in the middle. So you can kind of make decisions on kind of how you want to deal with that, what the sound quality is of those. But lots of possibilities. All of the chords that I've written there would all be called chord 1. They'd all be called chord 1 in root position because they've got that C at the bottom. But having said that, you've got lots of possibilities to space out the chord as you want to, and to put the notes above that bottom note in any order that you want to. And this is where the creative bit comes in. You know, this triad is fixed. So you need to know how to fix it accurately. Once you've got that and you want to turn it into chords, well, you've got the freedom to do any of these things or any other possibilities. So I hope that now makes it clear how you take a basic triad and turn it into a 4-part chord in root position with various different spacings and able to reorder the notes of the triad as you see fit.